The skillet hissed like a radio caught between stations, and maple steam rose off the pancakes, sweet and heavy as a promise I hadn't made in 20 years. I flipped eggs with a wrist I'd once used to key a handset in a sand-choked tent, and the TV in the corner murmured a military channel's low drum. Rotor thrum, clipped voices, that old familiar static. My husband rustled the Sunday paper so it crackled like dry leaves. My son drummed a fork on his plate. Impatient, 17, certain. You still watch that stuff, Mom? You were just a desk clerk, right? The word just landed with the neat cruelty only a teenager can conjure before life complicates the dictionary. The kitchen smelled like syrup and oranges and the faint metallic breath of the old toaster. I slid an egg onto his plate. The yolk held. Daniel chuckled behind the fortress of newsprint. Don't tease her, son. Your mom's the queen of paperwork. Laughter lifted and fluttered. Bright and harmless to them, a bird bouncing against a window. It went around the table and didn't touch me. I turned down the burner until the hiss softened. The TV crackled a fragment of a call sign, and I felt the old glide of a push-to-talk under my thumb. Phantom plastic, phantom heat, muscle memory surfacing like a fish. Eat while it's hot, I said, steady. 12 hours earlier, I'd been rearranging boxes in the attic. Dust motes drifting in a diagonal of sun, my fingers brushing a taped shoebox that once held something heavier than shoes. I hadn't opened it. I'd put it back. We kept medals in a house by deciding not to remember them. Ryan speared a pancake. No offense, he said, full of it. But paperwork isn't combat. Paperwork kept you in cleats, I said, softer than the line deserved. Eat. You were rear, he said, as if distance in yards measured distance in courage. The TV offered a snatch of rotor wash and a call I could have answered in my sleep. I shut it off, thumb clicking plastic. Silence took the corner and sat heavily like an old sergeant who'd seen too much to sugar it. I wiped my hands on a towel that smelled faintly of lemon dish soap and clean cotton. My ring clinked against the skillet handle, tiny, bright. Your mother ran this home, Daniel said, the compliment that had become a cage. That's the real battle. You win, Dad, Ryan said. She's the general of dishes. He grinned. Daniel chuckled again. The laugh found the ceiling and died there. I stacked plates. The fork tapping stopped. The air thinned like a tent flap lifting before a wind, you remember. The doorbell rang. Not a friendly ding-dong, a firm, measured bell. I felt it in my chest before I heard it twice. Ryan glanced up, surprised. Daniel lowered the paper, frown lines assembling. I'll get it, I said, already moving. The handle felt cool under my palm. I cracked the door. A man in uniform stood on the porch, winter light cutting the sharp lines of his jacket. The cold came with him, clean, metallic, honest. His hat brim cast a neat shadow. The scent of wet wool and aftershave lived in the air between us. Mrs. Reynolds? He asked. Yes. He glanced past me into the kitchen, took in the TV's blank face, the plates, the steam. His boots squeaked faintly against the mat. Then he met my eyes. The tone in his voice shifted to the one I recognized from rooms that smelled like coffee burned to tar and maps scotch-taped to plywood. I'm here on behalf of the Pentagon, he said. They'd like to speak to you about Operation Morning Star. The name hit like heat after cold, blooming behind my ribs. My fingers tightened on the edge of the door, wood smooth from years of hands. Behind me, Ryan's fork clattered. Daniel stood, chair legs scraping tile, paper slumping. The kitchen held its breath. Declassified? I asked. The word tasted like coins. Yes, ma'am. He reached into his coat and produced a sealed letter, thick stock, weighty. The envelope rasped against his glove as he offered it. My palm met paper, and for a second, the rough of it became the rough canvas of a radio bag, straps biting my shoulder, sand freckling sweat. Daniel's voice somewhere over my left shoulder. Declassified? After 20 years? Sir, the man said, without turning, all courtesy. Yes. Ryan tried to make a joke and failed. Mom, what is breakfast? I said, not unkindly. The letter was heavier than it should have been. The seal's raised edge pressed a crescent into my thumb, tactile as a warning. I shut the door gently and leaned my back against it. My heart had moved from a domestic metronome to a field beat. Daniel's eyes were on the envelope. What's Morningstar? A mission, I said. You filed forms? Ryan tried again, weak. I looked at him, really looked. He had Daniel's eyes and my stubborn jaw, syrup shining at the corner of his mouth like an innocence I had sworn to defend before he was even an idea. The TV reflected us faintly in its dark square, a family of three, and a letter that didn't belong to Sunday. I listened, I said. The kitchen lights hummed. A fly ticked against the window. Oranges in the bowl threw their oil into the air, bright and clean. I slid my thumb under the flap. The glue gave with a soft tear. Guardian 6, the first line began. I hadn't heard that name aloud in 2 decades. It reached into the past the way radio waves do. Unseen. Exact. Arriving without loss. The room wavered, then steadied. I sat, the chair cool under the backs of my knees. Daniel's hand hovered near my shoulder, then landed. Ryan leaned in, breath still smelling like syrup and doubt. I read. Words you aren't supposed to read when you've chosen a quiet life. Declassified. Interview. Recognition. Operation code name with coordinates I could still sketch on a napkin. Kandahar. Convoy. Intercepts. Prevented. Catastrophe. Request your presence. My mouth went dry. I reached for the orange juice. The glass sweated against my palm, cold and real. I drank and tasted childhood breakfast and blackout nights in a land far from this laminate countertop. 2 radios lived in my head at once, the one that used to crackle with call signs, and the one I'd spent years teaching myself to ignore so the house could be peaceful. Daniel touched the edge of the paper. You don't have to go, he said, reflex. I do, I said, and surprised myself with how little doubt fit in those 2 words. Ryan tried to smile, then didn't. Just to tell them you were paperwork. The letter lay on the table like a map folded down to one square. I set my palm on it, feeling the embossing under the skin, a braille of authority. The TV's black rectangle reflected my hand over the seal like a photograph that had waited 20 years to develop. Guardian 6, Daniel read softly. What is that? A voice, I said, and a choice. The skillet snapped once as leftover oil met a bubble of batter and spat. I reached back and turned off the burner. The kitchen fell into the quiet of a mission brief, the kind of silence that makes you hear your breath and your promises. My son watched me like a boy watching a magician's hand, not yet sure if he believed in the trick. The metal box in the attic was exactly where I'd left it. Taped, anonymous, heavy with what we had decided not to display. I had to tell them why. I had to tell them who. I had to tell them what white noise sometimes hides if you've never learned to listen. Finish your breakfast, I said, folding the letter. My voice surprised me. Calm, clipped. The way I sounded when the radio went wild and the sky didn't match the map. We have a drive. We have... To where? Ryan asked. I met his gaze. To the place where quiet gets recorded. The man on the porch waited, patient, the way couriers wait when they've carried heavier things than news. I tucked the letter into my jacket pocket. The paper rasped against fabric. The old folded uniform upstairs rustled in my mind like someone shifting under a blanket. I opened the door again. Cold air washed the syrup from the room and left it smelling like wool in winter. The officer straightened. Ma'am? I'll come, I said. He nodded once. Yes, Sergeant. The house felt smaller and braver all at once. I heard Ryan stand. Daniel's chair whispered back. I thought of the radio headset I'd kept in a shoebox, the way its foam smelled like sweat and dust, the way its cord curled like a question mark around years. I thought of the medal I hadn't earned for paperwork. I closed my eyes a heartbeat and saw a map, heard a warning, and remembered the clean, exact shape of a life chosen at a fork most people never see. I folded the letter once more, slid it against my heartbeat, and understood. They knew my kitchen. They didn't know my call sign, yet. I hadn't joined the army for glory. I joined because radios told the truth when people wouldn't. In basic, the headset smelled like rubber and salt, and the push to talk clicked under my thumb with a promise. Say it clean, say it fast, keep them breathing. I learned how a map looks different when your voice has to drag men back onto it. Logistics was the name on my paperwork. Lifelines were what we moved. They called me Staff Sergeant Reynolds back then, until one dust crazed month when a commander didn't make it through an intersection that looked safe on paper. In the tent after, coffee burned to bitterness on an electric plate while someone whispered, "We need a six." Ahmed. I was standing closest to the radio. The call sign fit like a coat you don't have time to tailor. Guardian 6. The canvas chair creaked under me. The headset's foam bit my ears. The ether filled with people trying not to die. Then life changed in a quieter room, one that smelled like disinfectant and baby lotion. Two pink lines. The clinic's fluorescent hum sounded like weak signal. I carried my son in my body and the army in my bones. The choice came without drama. Two loves, one pair of hands. I took the discharge. The clerk stamped a form. The echo lived longer than the ink. Daniel and I married fast, then slow. Vows first, furniture later. He was a civilian contractor with a tidy badge and a talent for telling rooms what would happen to money. He always spoke in future tense. "You're the heart of the home, not the battlefield," he said, at first as comfort, later as command. The sentence settled over our house like a quilt that got heavier each winter. We moved to a suburb where sprinklers hissed at 5 a.m., and the trash truck announced itself with a hydraulic groan that made me flinch the first month. I put the metal box and the folded uniform in the attic, under Christmas wreaths. The cardboard rasped as I slid it across beams. Dust motes hung in a shaft of afternoon, a galaxy I could breathe. I told myself the attic was Honor's quiet room, not exile. Ryan arrived with lungs like sirens and fists that unclenched only when he heard the dryer's soft thump. At night, when he finally slept, I missed the radio's crackle the way you miss a nerve that's been numbed. I'd turn on the baby monitor just to hear static and pretend I wasn't listening for coordinates. We built a life out of ordinary sounds: the dishwasher's gurgle, the lawnmower's snarl, the low tick of the thermostat deciding it was time to warm us. Sunday roast made the kitchen smell like rosemary and fat. I learned the choreography of groceries and permission slips and the appreciative silence of a house that runs on time. It is work to make a home quiet. I didn't bill anyone. Daniel praised me in the tone you use for a reliable appliance. "You keep us running," he'd say, tapping the counter. "That's victory." He didn't mean harm. Harm arrived anyway, in 8 small words he never thought to weigh. "You were never built for the messy stuff." I'd smile, then find an excuse to check the dryer, lay my palm on warm metal, and remember the feel of a radio's casing under heat. I almost corrected him once, almost spoke of a night when the air sang wrong and a convoy fell off the grid. The tent smelled like hot plastic and sweat. My fingers were shaking from caffeine and fear. I laced them together until they learned obedience. A pilot shouted over a bad link. A lieutenant stuttered over 2 identical hill names, and my mouth did the math. I rerouted coordinates while someone argued doctrine. The generator coughed, lights flickered, and the world tightened into numbers and breath. After, the sky peeled itself back to blue, like it had never tried to collapse. The record stayed blank. Chain of command likes, clean lines more than saved lives. The debrief scrubbed me like a stain that didn't match the sofa. I packed that night into the shoebox too, between ribbons and a coin I hadn't earned publicly. The tape squealed across cardboard. The attic wood bit my knees. I told myself silence was maturity, not deletion. Ryan grew tall on cereal and soccer. He wore headphones that bled drum and bass into the hallway at 2 a.m. He learned my "don't text while I'm driving" voice and thought it was my only command tone. When his history teacher asked him to interview a veteran, he picked his friend's uncle. Mom filed forms somewhere overseas. He wrote on a worksheet, pencil squeaking. I signed the bottom and told myself dignity doesn't correct the harmless. Once during a thunderstorm, the lights snapped off and the house exhaled a surprise. Ryan whooped. "Epic!" he shouted, chasing the sound of rain with his phone flashlight. I walked to the breaker panel and rested my fingertips against cool metal. The smell of ozone threaded the air. My body remembered too much. I flipped the switch. The house hummed back to life, grateful, unknowing. Daniel kissed my cheek, perfunctory. "Queen of circuits," he said. "Just keeping us breathing," I murmured. The only person who ever hinted he knew I had a different rank was an elderly neighbor who'd been Signal Corps in another war. He smelled like Old Spice and sawdust. He'd tap the side of his nose and say, "Comms win fights." I'd nod. Then I'd go home, fold laundry still warm from the dryer, and lay a hand for a second on the fabric. Tactile proof I could still smooth chaos into order. Sometimes late, I'd stand at the attic hatch with the cord in my fingers. The ladder rattled in its rails, wood dry as a secret. I'd pull, climb into dust and insulation, and open the shoebox. The old radio headset's foam had gone hard at the edges. It smelled faintly of time and sweat. I'd fit it over my ears. The silence on the other side was complete, as if a channel had been reserved for me and was waiting for a word. I never spoke. I sat in the dark, the metal's ribbon cool against my wrist, and listened to a noise that wasn't there. Daniel would call up, half joking. "You hiding?" "Checking a thing," I'd say. "Come to bed," he'd answer. "Big day tomorrow." Always a big day that never required a call sign. My backstory isn't the kind that sells posters. No helo insertions, no door kicking. Just hours of holding a frequency and refusing to let panic pick the next song. I told myself my boy didn't need his mother to be a legend. He needed pancakes at 8 and a ride at 3, and the luxury of assuming the world would be exactly where he left it. I paid that bill with silence. When the letter came, the sound of the seal tearing was louder than it should have been. It cut through 20 years of careful quiet like a knife sliding along tape. The house seemed to tilt, a subtle shift like a ship finding a new bearing. My son looked at me with a face that didn't have room yet for the person I had been. He'd find the room. I'd give him the floor plan. I closed the attic that night with dust on my palms and the headset's imprint still faint on my temples, and I understood. The past wasn't done transmitting. It was about to call me by name. The Pentagon's corridors sounded like controlled weather. Shoe squeaks, hushed badges, doors sighing shut. Fluorescent light flattened everything to clarity. Coffee hung in the air, burned a shade too long, the old ops room perfume. I walked beside the courier, letter in my pocket rasping softly against the jacket lining like a talisman that wanted to speak. Security took my ID with a practiced nod. Plastic slid across laminate, a stamp thumped once. "This way, ma'am." The elevator hummed, ascending with the calm of a machine that trusted its cables. My fingertips found each other and laced, old ritual before contact, before static. They ushered me into a briefing room where the carpet swallowed sound. Flags flanked a seal, the table gleamed, a carafe breathed heat. Brass waited, 2 generals, a colonel, a recorder with hands like a pianist. The air held that pressurized stillness meetings get when truth is heavier than the agenda. A chair scraped back for me. I sat. The cushion sighed. The colonel, Hayes, nameplate sober, leaned forward, elbows respectful of distance. "Sergeant Reynolds," he said. Then, with the slight smile of a man who knows a secret's proper name, or should we say Guardian 6? The call sign unraveled a decade in my lungs. "Sir," I said, voice steady. The room's lights found the silver at my temples and turned it honest. He set a folder on the table. Clasps clicked. Paper whispered. A map I knew in my bones surfaced. Kandahar haloed by grease pencil arcs. He touched a coordinate. "Operation Morning Star," he said. "Declassified as of last week." I smelled paper and toner and the faint ozone that lives in rooms full of machines thinking. My thumb pressed the ridge of the letter's seal in my pocket. Small pain keeping me present. A general cleared his throat, baritone softened by respect. "We review our own ghosts, Sergeant," he said. "Sometimes we find the spine we hid." Hayes nodded. "An air tasking order went wrong that night. Friendly convoy, bad grid. Intercepts told us a strike was flying toward friendlies." He glanced up. "Your intercepts." Static rose in my ears like memory putting on boots. I saw the tent again, the cracked mug, the generator's cough, the glow-slick map, the pilot's voice fraying, the convoy lead trying to sound older than he was. I had put words between them with both hands and a spine I borrowed from the job. "You rerouted coordinates manually," Hayes said. Each verb landed neat. "Under a false billet after your CO was lost. You broke chain to save it." I looked at the flag. Its fringe hardly moved in the soft air. "The chain was already broken," I said. The general's mouth twitched. Approval he didn't spend often. 32 lives stayed in the world, eyes, he said. Your voice did that. The recorder's keys clicked. Quiet staccato, history catching up. Hayes slid a velvet box across the table. The nap brushed the wood with a soft rasp. It rested under my fingers like a small animal trusting my palm. Sergeant Reynolds, he said, we are awarding you the Distinguished Service Cross. The words didn't echo, they settled. The room seemed to tilt half a degree, then steady. Heat collected behind my eyes, not drama. Pressure equalization after a long dive. My throat tightened. I swallowed coffee ghosts and 20 years of quiet. I was never supposed to exist on that mission, I said. You didn't, Hayes said, not unkind. Officially. The general leaned in, eyes clear. Unofficially, you moved heaven and coordinates. He paused. One of those 32 had a name you might recognize. My skin prickled, as if an old headset pressed back into place. Sir? He checked the paper once, not because he needed to, but because precision is ritual. Captain Daniel Reynolds. The chair under me might as well have been steel. Air thinned, then returned. For a second, I felt the old tarp roof flutter above my head, smelled the hot plastic, heard a convoy voice I hadn't known to keep. My husband, 20 years younger, on a road I'd bent away from fire. Hayes read my face carefully, then set his hand flat on the folder, grounding the moment. He never knew. You weren't on the log. I nodded, the movement small, the meaning large. The velvet under my palm felt cool, directional. The metal inside waited, not for applause, but for location. I could place it now. Why now, I asked. Because truth ages better than lies, the general said. And because men who were boys then kept writing your name on forms that didn't have your line. He allowed himself the smallest smile. Persistence is its own rank. Hayes turned the folder. A transcript sat on top. The paper smelled faintly of dust and ink. Bold text marked my calls, Guardian 6, threading between panicked syllables like a spine. My voice on the page looked like a bridge. We'd like you to accept it at a brief ceremony next week, Hayes said. Quiet, clean, your call on who knows. My hands had stopped shaking. The letter in my pocket felt light now, as if paper also exhales. My family, I said, they think I filed forms. Then let's file this properly, the general said. I opened the box. The hinge whispered. Bronze winked in the cold light, ribbon catching blue, white, red. The metal smelled like new cloth and faint polish. It wasn't heavy. It didn't need to be. Weight lived in the air. Thank you, I said. 2 words, exact. Hayes stood first. The room followed, a soft swell of fabric and chair legs. Not applause, recognition. He extended his hand. His palm was warm, dry, human. Some heroes wait a lifetime to be heard, he said. I shook once. My grip remembered strength it hadn't had to prove in years. I closed the box and slid it back. I wasn't ready to carry it out like a headline. Not yet. In the hallway, the hum of air handlers soothed like white noise. I touched the letter, then the velvet through the tote, then the seam where pocket met palm. Radio, metal. 2 motifs, 1 frequency. On the elevator down, my reflection in the brushed steel looked like a woman who had been both missing and here the whole time. The doors opened with a sigh. Cold air met me at the security exit and made the metal ribbon inside the box feel cooler through the velvet. Imagine touch translating anyway. Outside, I dialed Daniel. The call rang, tinny in the open air. He picked up on the 3rd ring, clatter of keyboard behind him. Office air all around his words. Everything okay? Yes, I said. And no. Work? He asked. Old work, I said. We need to talk. I hung up before I softened it. Across the plaza, a flag lifted and settled, as if answering a win from a time I knew by heart. I walked toward the car with the medal in a paper bag and the past in my pocket, and I understood. Home would be another battlefield, only quieter, and finally mine to choose. The drive home hummed like a steady carrier wave. Tires on asphalt, heater blowing dry warmth that smelled faintly of dust. The metal box rode in a brown paper bag on the passenger seat, its velvet breathing a chill through the paper as if it had its own weather. I tapped the wheel with 2 fingers, an old keying rhythm I hadn't used in 20 years. Guardian 6 to home. Copy. In the kitchen, evening light flattened the counters to pale steel. The refrigerator clicked on. The air took on a clean, Freon cold edge. I set the bag on the table. The paper scraped wood, ordinary and loud. Daniel came in loosening his tie. Office air clinging to him. Toner, stale coffee, a hint of his aftershave. "What's that?" he asked. "Something I never thought I'd see again," I said. Ryan skidded around the corner in socks. "Mom, did they hire you?" He was trying for a joke. It landed as curiosity. I didn't open the box yet. I poured water. The glass sweated, a cool ring forming on the table. "Sit," I said, "both of you." Daniel's smile carried habit. "This serious?" "Yes." He took a chair, leather belt creaking. Ryan dropped into the other, chair legs squealing against tile. The house quieted, the way a tent does before the first transmission. I laid the paper bag flat and eased out the velvet. My fingers felt the nap reverse, then smooth, soft, directional. I didn't open it. "I need to tell you who I was," and I said. Daniel chuckled, reflexive. "You were logistics." "I was a voice," I said. "Guardian 6. He blinked. The name felt strange in our kitchen, like sand on a clean plate. "What does that mean?" I set my palm on the box. "When our CO was killed, I took his radio. I took his calls. I worked under a false billet because the chain had a hole that would swallow people alive if we didn't bridge it." Ryan's eyes flicked to the TV's black screen, then back. "Bridge? Like, what?" "Like you hear two people shouting the wrong map," I said, keeping it plain. "And you put your body between their mistakes." Daniel's jaw moved the way it does when he's recalculating a budget. "You're saying—" "I rerouted a strike," I said. "Manually, under heat. The convoy lived." He leaned back an inch. The chair sighed. "You broke chain of command." "The chain was already broken," I said. Ryan's sock rubbed the tile. Soft rasp. "You saved people?" 32, I said. Daniel's face drained, color sliding away as if a dimmer fell. He reached for the back of his chair and missed by half an inch, hand hovering like a signal-seeking lock. "Which convoy?" "Kandahar Corridor," I said. "Night op. 2 hill names too similar to coexist." He swallowed. "That convoy?" He didn't finish. Ryan turned to him. "Dad?" Daniel's voice came back thin and exact like wire-pulled taut. "I was in that convoy." Silence recalibrated the room. The heater clicked off. The world held breath. I opened the box. The hinge whispered. Bronze caught the kitchen light and threw it back a degree warmer. The metal didn't glow. It steadied. Daniel stared. The paper-thin disbelief in his eyes tore on something stronger. "Why didn't you—" "Because I didn't exist on paper," I said. "They scrubbed me to keep the report clean." I touched the ribbon, smooth and cool. Scandal costs careers. Lives cost more. He reached toward the metal, stopped. "All these years," he murmured. "I thanked God. I thanked luck." His laugh cracked. "I should have thanked you." "You married me?" I said, softer than I felt. "That was thanks enough." His face went complicated, pride jostling with shame, both fighting habit. "I called you just Mom." "You weren't wrong," I said. "Moms are the toughest rank there is." Ryan's chair scraped forward. He looked at the metal like it might rise and speak. "They gave you that today?" "They will next week," I said. "Pentagon ceremony, quiet, clean." He blinked fast. "Can I come?" "Yes." Daniel cleared his throat. "You risked your career." "I risked breathing along with them," I said. "Careers mend. Graves don't." He flinched, a small, honest movement. "I minimized you." "Patronizing fits like a soft glove," I said. "Hard to feel until it's pointed out." He tried for defense. Habit again. "I kept us afloat." "We kept us afloat," I said. "Different storms." Ryan stood, restless energy looking for mission. "What's in the attic?" "Shoebox," I said. Old radio headset, a coin, some ribbons. He took a step. I'll get it. Careful on the ladder, I said. Wood's dry. He bolted. The hall filled with the thud of his socks and the ladder's rattle. Daniel and I stayed in the kitchen with the metal between us like a new map. I told people you filed forms, he said. 8 words that weighed, finally. I let you, I said. Why? Peace, I said, then added the second truth. Cowardice. He shook his head. You're not a coward. I didn't correct you, I said. That's a kind of quiet that helps the wrong story. He sat forward. His aftershave felt sharper now, like mint on a cut. I'm sorry. Good, I said, and didn't pat it. Ryan reappeared with the shoebox, dust motes orbiting his hair in the hall light. It smells like old books, he said, wrinkling his nose. He set the box down. Tape tore with a squeal. Inside, the headset lay like a fossil. He lifted it. The foam brushed his palm, brittle at the edges. You wore this? He asked. For hours that ran long, I said. He raised it to his ears, then stopped. Reverent. He placed it on the table instead, next to the metal. Radio, metal. 2 frequencies finding each other after a long skip. Daniel reached for the headset, thumb rubbing a groove in the plastic where mine had lived. This kept me alive. Words did, I said. This carried them. He looked at me then with a face I hadn't seen on him since we were new, and the world was risky in a fun way. Awe, unvarnished, unplanned. Come to the ceremony, I said, before he asked permission from a habit I was retiring. Front row. Of course, he said. Ryan's voice shook once and found balance. Can I salute? Is that dumb? It's honest, I said. That counts. He squared his shoulders in our kitchen, ridiculous and perfect, and raised his hand. The angle was wrong, his wrist wobbled. He held it anyway. The gesture landed not on protocol, on love. Daniel stood too, belt creaking, chair legs murmuring on tile. He didn't salute. He did something harder. He shut his mouth and listened. The whole house listened with him, the heater off, the fridge a distant hum, the clock ticking like a metronome that had finally found the right tempo. I closed the metal box gently. The gnat brushed my glove. I slid it back into the bag. Dinner, I said. Then we plan. Plan what? Daniel asked. How to put truth back in the room, I said. Ryan grinned through damp eyes. Project, Mom? Operation Morningstar, I said. Phase 2. The oven dinged, timid, overeager. The sound made us laugh, relief leaving the room like steam. I reached for the mitt, fabric rough against my palm, and pulled out a tray. Heat rolled across my face, clean and honest. Behind me, the metal waited in its box, the headset washed in silence, and my son's chair creaked as he sat carefully, newly aware of the weight a table can hold. The invitation email from the Pentagon pinged my phone as the timer beeped, and I knew the next battle line would be public, bright, and mine to draw. The Pentagon auditorium breathed like an engine at idle. Air handlers low, microphones humming, the faint shuffle of dress shoes on carpet. Light fell clean from recessed panels, a flat official brightness that made brass glint and flaws honest. I wore a borrowed uniform. The seams didn't know my body anymore, but my posture remembered me. The metal box waited on a podium draped in blue. Front row, Daniel in a dark suit, jaw fixed, Ryan beside him, tie crooked, knee bouncing. The faint bite of floor wax sat under the old, comforting smell of pressed wool. Flags stood still in their stands, fringe quiet. Colonel Hayes spoke first. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice carried without reaching. Some stories return when the room is finally ready to listen. The murmurs thinned. Paper stilled. I felt the old calm arrive, the one that had steadied my voice when chaos screamed, the one that made long hours feel like duty's exact length. Hayes opened a folder. The paper whispered, a soft cue. Staff Sergeant Martha Reynolds, he said, and the rank turned the air warmer. Call sign, Guardian 6. A ripple. People adjusted in their seats, not sure why a logistics sergeant had a warrior's tag. My palms were dry. The collar lay cool against the pulse at my throat. I stepped to the mark. The microphone smelled faintly of ozone and dust. I heard, beneath everything, the memory of static. Hayes read the citation. For conspicuous heroism at the risk of life, above and beyond, each clause landed clean, polished by time, intercepting and correcting misdirected strike coordinates under fire. He didn't look at me. He read to the room, letting it do the arithmetic, thereby preventing a friendly fire catastrophe and saving 32 American lives. A low sound moved through the seats, breath collected, released. Hayes closed the folder and looked up. One of those 32, he said, was Captain Daniel Reynolds. The line detonated without noise. Heads turned. Daniel blinked, the truth hitting him publicly now, not just in a kitchen. His hands opened on his knees, empty and honest. Ryan stared at his father, then at me, then back, his teenage certainty crumbling into something better. The general stepped forward with the box. The velvet brushed my glove, soft, directional, as he lifted the lid. Bronze caught the flat light and made it warmer. The ribbon looked impossibly young. Sergeant Reynolds, he said, pin steady in his fingers. On behalf of a grateful nation. He pinned the medal to a jacket that once fit without effort. The metal was cool against my chest, the weight precise, not heavy. A tiny click as clasp met fabric sounded louder than it should have, a seal closing, a frequency locking. Applause began, then stalled, as if the room understood something else needed to happen first. Silence pulled tight. Ryan stood, awkwardly abruptly, his chair legs bumping the row behind with a muffled thud. He raised his hand in a salute he'd learned from movies. Wrist wrong, elbow high. Pride shook his fingertips. It was beautiful. The row behind him rose, then the next. Daniel hesitated one breath, then stood too. He didn't salute. He placed his hand flat over his heart, not as performance, but as inventory, life, beat, given back. The auditorium rose into stand, a soft thunder of fabric and decision. The air changed temperature, warmth arriving not from ducks, but from backs, straightening under a common fact. Daniel's eyes were wet. His mouth worked once, gave up on pride as posture, and found humility as language. "I'm sorry," he said, just loud enough for the first rows to hear. "For every time I called you just Mom." I let the quiet hold him, then answered at my own speed, steady as a carrier wave. "You weren't wrong," I said. "Moms are the toughest rank there is." A wash of relieved laughter, honest, brief, rippled and passed. Hayes stepped back. The general nodded to me, an invitation to say something or nothing. I felt the mic's faint warmth, the way it vibrated minutely with the room's breath. I placed my palm on the podium's edge, wood smooth, cool, and spoke the line I had saved for the moment truth needed fewer words than apology. He taught me to stay home. I taught him who brought him home. 16 words. The room absorbed them like thirsty ground takes rain. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then applause came, not as noise, but as a tide, controlled, grateful, standing. A few soldiers in the back, old posture, newer bellies, lifted their hands for a second, kept it tight, let it fall. The sound filled the flat-lit space without echo. Even the flags seemed to hold their breath. A small mini-turn arrived in the front row. Daniel straightened and finally saluted. It wasn't regulation, thumb crooked, wrist soft, but it was a truer line than any he'd drawn on a whiteboard. He held it long enough to learn the angle, then dropped it, wiped his cheek once with the back of his hand, and laughed at himself under his breath. Ryan edged to the aisle, turned, and faced me square. He lifted his arm again, found a better angle, and saluted with a steadier hand. The gesture clicked into place inside me like a plug finding a socket. A circuit completed. Radio to metal, mother to son, pass to room. The general leaned in, voice for me alone, breath carrying a faint coffee bitter. "Some weights are worth their length," he said. "Only if they end clean," I said. He smiled with his eyes. This one did. When the crowd sat, it was careful, as if sitting might crease the moment. The PA crackled softly, old habit, and stilled. Hayes closed his folder with a quiet finality. He shook my hand. The grip was dry, firm, grateful. We turned for photos. The flash popped, bright, brief heat across my lids. I stood tall in a jacket that wasn't mine anymore but carried a medal that was. The ribbon touched cloth, cloth touched skin, skin remembered. Radio, metal. Two motifs, one frequency, now loud enough to register on any dial in the house I'd kept running. As we stepped off the stage, the corridor outside smelled like copy paper and floor cleaner, institutional as ever. Daniel waited at the bottom of the steps, Ryan beside him. The metal lay cool against my chest. My palm brushed it once. Check. Still there. Finally visible. Daniel took a small step into my path, not blocking. Meeting. Permission to catch up? He said, half smile, voice raw. Granted, I said. Hayes gestured toward a side room for family. The door swung open on oiled hinges and held. Behind us, the audience began to talk again. Voices low, 100 small frequencies rejoining the air. We crossed the threshold together, metal steady, radio silent at last, and I felt the next scene arriving. The quiet after a storm choosing to stay. Home carried that after-ceremony hush, like a radio set to volume 1, signal steady, no chatter. The metal lay cool against my chest as I unpinned it. The ribbon slid through my fingers with a faint fabric whisper. Coffee steamed on the counter, dark and honest. The house smelled like dust warmed by afternoon sun and the lemon oil I'd rubbed into the table a day ago. Ryan was already on the attic ladder, socks whispering on wood. Careful, I called. Copy, he said. Awkward code, new in his mouth. He disappeared into the square of dim. The attic breathed down a dry paper smell. Old cardboard, summer heat stored in timber. A minute later, the thump of a box tape ripping, a soft curse, softer apology. Dust motes poured into the hallway light like a shaken snow globe. He reemerged, cradling the shoebox, the headset cord draped over his wrist like a question mark that had finally found its sentence. In the living room, he cleared a shelf with gentle clacks of wood on wood and set the headset down beside the spot we'd chosen. He unlatched the metal case, velvet-kissed hinge with a small sigh. Bronze caught the window's low light and returned it warmer. He stepped back, squinting, measuring. They deserve to breathe, he said. They already did, I answered, placing the metal on its stand. That's why you're here. Daniel stood in the doorway, tie loose, eyes tired in a way that meant waking up, not wearing down. He wiped a thumb across a line of dust and smiled at his own smudge, sheepish. Permission to get the level? Granted, I said. We made a little ceremony of it. No speeches, only small sounds. The level's bubble-tapping glass, the shelf's screws tightening, the headset's foam brushing my palm as I settled it so the ear pads faced the room. The house listened. The radiator ticked in the baseboard like a metronome, keeping our hands in time. Daniel edged close to the metal, not touching. I should have asked more, he said. You can ask now, I said. He nodded, swallowed. What did it feel like? Like catching a falling thing with a word, I said. He exhaled, slow. I should have listened more. You are, I said. Keep doing it. Ryan hovered, hands in his pockets, teenager trying to stand without fidgeting. Can I keep the box? He asked, lifting the empty velvet like a treasure chest that could still hold air. Sure, sir, I said. He slipped it under his arm, then hesitated at the headset. Does it still work? It works on me, I said. That's enough. He nodded, accepting a frequency you can't tune with a dial. He crossed to the bookcase and moved his soccer trophies, tiny metal forwards mid-kick to make room. The new arrangement clicked. Boy and mother and years, crystalline and plain. Daniel fetched a small frame from his office. A photo of him, younger, sunburned, grin unbroken by knowledge. He set it on the shelf's edge. The three objects, photo, metal, radio, seemed to recognize each other and settle into a conversation they'd been trying to start for 2 decades. We ate late. Pasta steamed. The sauce smelled like basil and garlic, simple and forgiving. Ryan shoveled a bite, paused, then looked up. I want to learn the alphabet, he said. What alphabet? Daniel asked. Radio, Ryan said, cheeks coloring. You know, A as in alpha. Start with listening, I said. Letters come next. He grinned, relief warming his face. Copy that. Daniel raised his glass. To Guardian 6, he said, voice careful. The toast not a show, but a repair. And to the home she kept on frequency. We clinked water, not wine. 3 clear taps. The sound felt right. After dishes, the house settled. Night pressed cool against the windows. I turned off the living room lamp. The metal's edge caught the last light and held it a second, then let it go. In the dark, the headset's silhouette looked like a crescent moon hanging low over a landscape we knew by heart. My phone buzzed once on the counter. An email banner, subject line short and formal. Invitation, guest speaker, signal and leadership seminar. I didn't open it yet. I stood in the doorway and listened to the moment like I used to listen for a call sign buried in static. Room quiet, breathing even, frequency clear. I touched the metal lightly, metal cool against my fingertip, and felt the day reduced to what mattered. A shelf set straight, a boy learning how to stand, a man relearning how to listen, a house that could finally hold all of us. When I opened the email, the cursor blinked like a waiting cursor on an old comms screen, and I understood the next transmission would belong to me. Months later, the lecture hall smelled faintly of chalk and varnished wood, a clean, school day scent that made the rows feel earnest. Cadets shifted in wool and cotton. Notebooks whispered open. The mic was warm under my fingertips, a small hum in the stand like a radio waiting for traffic. I wore a blazer, not a uniform. The metal pinned at my collar felt cool at first, then took my temperature and settled. I told the story without theatrics, maps and call signs, a hole in the chain, a voice bridging it. The projector's fan breathed behind me, soft as a held note. They listened the way rooms do when they recognize duty's shape. Backs straightening, pens pausing. I finished with the sentence that had lived in my throat for 20 years. They say some women leave their mark on the world. I left mine on a radio wave. Silence held, then the room stood, not for spectacle, but alignment. Stand, a soft thunder of souls and intent. The applause was careful, grateful. A cadet in the front row saluted, wrist stiff, eyes bright. He dropped his hand and mouthed, "Thank you." I nodded once. Enough. At home, evening rinsed the windows in blue. The shelf met me first. Headset, metal, a younger Daniel in a frame. The radiator ticked a soft cadence. Ryan sprawled on the rug with a notebook, whispering, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. Getting used to the weight of letters that carry lives. Daniel leaned in the doorway, sleeves rolled, smelling like soap and paper. The day stripped down to what kept. I touched the metal. The metal lifted the last of the hall's heat from my skin. The headset's foam brushed my knuckle, a faint rasp that felt like memory deciding to be kind. The house breathed, coffee and lemon oil, and the clean nothing that means peace. For 20 years, they thought I was just a mother. They were right. That's why I never gave up. I turned off the lamp. In the dim, the ribbon held a thin line of light and let it go. The room stayed true on frequency. The signal I'd kept alive for strangers had become a language my family finally spoke. Mothers don't retire from courage. If you believe true strength doesn't vanish when the uniform comes off, subscribe for stories where quiet mothers carry forgotten wars.